Well, it looks like summer is officially gone in California, and while it isn't exactly chilly yet, it is overcast and the sun is nowhere to be seen. Although most people in modern times don't give it a second thought, the sun has played a pivotal role in history and prehistory as a symbolic centerpiece in many mythologies around the world. While it's obvious that the sun's warmth dictates the behavior of migrating birds, when flowers bloom, and the time farmers plant and harvest their crops, its cyclical path in the sky, as well as that of other planets and stars, have become associated with many religions, both pantheistic and monotheistic, even if much of the population is no longer aware of it. Astrotheology is a name given to the influence that celestial objects have on religion, and the cyclical pattern in the heavens was tracked carefully to not only time when to carry out sacrifice and fertility rituals, but was also vital to seafaring people, such as the ancient Phoenicians, to be able to navigate their ships at night. While many people associate the Phoenicians with purple because of the famous imperial purple dye that they made from seashells, the name was actually given to them by the Greeks and comes from the Greek word phoinos, meaning red. There are several reasons for this, which I'd argue are more relevant than the reddish purple dye. First of all, they applied red ochre to their skin, a practice which was mimicked by the Minoans, another ancient seafaring civilization genetically related to the Phoenicians, but immediately predating them, as well as the ancient Egyptians, Mycenaeans, which refers to a period of Bronze Age Greece, the Etruscans, which were a culture in Italy right before the Roman Empire, and other ethnically related people which dominated the entire Mediterranean, from southern Europe to North Africa to the Levant, or Phoenicia. In fact, this practice of red ochre stretches all the way back into the Pleistocene, or Ice Age, and was done by Cro-Magnon, who also covered their graves in red ochre, as well as their descendants, the ancient Basque, and as far away as the New World by Native Americans genetically related to the ancient Basque, called Solutreans, where the term redskins comes from, in terms of Indians, which had to do with the red ochre paint that they applied to their white skin. I'll include a link in the description to a video I did about the red paint people, or maritime archaic, for those interested. Red ochre is iron oxide, an active ingredient in most modern sunscreens, and a plausible theory for why it was used by these ancient fair-skinned people. But in occult circles, mystery schools, and secret societies, it is understood that the red color is symbolic and has to do with the element of fire and sun worship, and was a religious practice that stretched back to the time of Atlantis, as Atlanteans themselves, who I associate with Cro-Magnon, were said to have been sun worshippers. I want to stress that these ancient people did not literally worship the sun as a being per se, but as the ultimate symbolic representation of light and of fire, but not any flame, symbolic of an astral flame or etheric fire. This secret fire is at the inner core of the mystery school religions, similar to the concept of the black sun philosophy that some of you may have heard about, and in my estimation is the true significance of the red ochre, even though nobody likes to get sunburned and the sunscreen theory is popular in anthropology circles. The root of the word Phoenician is also associated with the phoenix, which also means red, and is used to describe a mythological bird that cyclically regenerates or is born again. Associated with fire and the sun, a phoenix obtains new life by arising from the ashes of its predecessor. The legend of the phoenix is also very ancient and was retold by Herodotus, Pliny the Elder, Pope Clement I, Ovid, Isidore of Seville, and many alchemists through the ages, and symbolizes renewal, spiritual rebirth, and was linked to the solar cults, including those of the Roman Empire, as well as parallels to Christianity. While it's most popular from Greek mythology, the phoenix has analogues in other traditions, including the Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu Garuda, which is a bird-like creature in Vedic literature, the Russian or Slavic firebird, which according to folklore is a magical and prophetic glowing or burning bird from a faraway land with majestic plumage that glows brightly, emitting red, orange, and yellow light like a bonfire. The Turks have the Konrul, the Persians or Iranians have the Simorgh, the Yazidi have a peacock angel, and incidentally, for those who don't know, the Yazidi live in northern Iraq and were brutalized by the ISIS fighters who raped and sold the Yazidi women into sex slavery, claiming that they wanted to, quote, impregnate Yazidi women and smash their blonde Aryan bloodline. While some have called Yazidi devil worshippers or Luciferian, I'd like to point out that Lucifer means light bearer, and these people trace their religion back thousands of years before the Abrahamic religions, which often demonized and vilified the faiths that predated them that they were trying to mass convert, which sometimes included the color red, which is sacred to the Yazidi, and emphasized during the Yazidi New Year festival with women decorating both their houses and their family graves with red flowers. The Yazidis believe that they are descended from Adam, but not Eve. According to them, Jews, Muslims, and Christians are descended from the children that Adam and Eve created together, and they refuse to convert, insisting that they marry within their race to maintain the integrity of their Aryan bloodline. Another reason Yazidis are associated with Luciferianism is because according to Yazidi myth, the peacock angel, like Lucifer in Jewish and Christian belief, rebelled against God. God then casts the peacock into the fire, who then weeps for 40,000 years until the tears put out the flames of hell, and then the peacock is reconciled with God and placed in charge of the daily affairs of the world. The story is obviously full of symbolism, and the peacock contains both good and evil, light and darkness. It is this relationship with serpent symbology and the flaming peacock, whom some Christians, Jews, and Muslims identify with Lucifer and use to justify the rape and sex slavery of Aryan Yazidi women and children. Absolutely barbaric and disgusting. The Yazidis are not heretical Jews or Christians. They are not a sect of Muslims, nor are they Zoroastrians. And finally, they are not devil worshippers. To anyone that is remotely educated in the symbolic meanings of their ancient mythology, which goes back over 6,000 years. The Arabian anka is a large mysterious female bird of mythology said to fly far away and appear only once in ages. However, it is said that she can also be found at the place of the setting of the sun. In China, there is the feng huang, which are mythological birds found in East Asian mythology. The males were originally called feng and the females huang, but they're blurred into a single feminine entity so that the bird can be paired with the Chinese dragon, which is traditionally deemed male. That said, the concept of the solar deity having hermaphrodite qualities is an ancient and alchemical concept which speaks to the idea that each sex or gender has energetic aspects of both universal forces or polarities inside of them, represented by a male and female aspect. In fact, the word hermaphrodite is a combination of the words Hermes and Aphrodite, and the hermaphrodite attributes can be seen in symbols commonly affiliated with Luciferian philosophy, such as the Baphomet, which has both male and female physiology. The phoenix myth is also part of early Christian traditions, which may also have parallels in the Bennu of Egyptian mythology. According to Herodotus, quote, "The Egyptians have also another sacred bird called the phoenix, which I myself have never seen except in pictures. Indeed, it is a great rarity, even in Egypt, only coming there once in 500 years, when the old phoenix dies. Its size and appearance, if it is like the pictures, are as follows. The plumage is partly red, partly golden, while the general make and size are almost exactly that of an eagle." He goes on to associate the Egyptian phoenix to the temple of the sun. The phoenix is sometimes pictured in ancient and medieval literature and medieval art as endowed with a halo, which emphasizes the bird's connection with the sun. In the oldest images of phoenixes on record, they often have 7 rays, like Helios, the Greek personification of the sun. In the oldest surviving Latin gospel, called the Codex Bobiensis, currently housed at the Turin National Library, near the famous Shroud of Turin, this late 4th or early 5th century book preserves portions of Matthew and Mark, and has shockingly substituted the name of pagan deities, Helion, which is the god of the sun, and Jove, which is Zeus, instead of the words Eloi, which is Aramaic for my God, and sheep. According to Matthew Larson of Princeton University and the author of Gospels Before the Book, quote, "We have evidence of Christian thinking about Jesus' death and resurrection in association with the setting and raising of the sun, and in the 3rd and 4th century we see a blending of imagery of Christ and Sol Invictus." Now, this isn't to say that Jesus didn't exist. That's not what's being insinuated here. But what it does seem to indicate is the symbolic comparison with the celestial objects in context of a cyclical death and resurrection, or rebirth. So the part in the New Testament where Jesus cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" it instead says that Jesus calls out to the sun god Helios instead. I've mentioned this before in a prior video, and some of the comments dismiss this, saying that only the King James Version counts, even though it was compiled many centuries later. I'd also like to point out that the King James Bible substituted the word morning star with Lucifer, or light bearer. The Hebrew original is Hillel, which means shining one, similar to the reference used by the illuminated ones in secret societies, who revere Venus, or the goddess creative energy, which is tied to gnosis, or the knowledge of spiritual mysteries. So Lucifer, in a historical context, shares archetypal traits with not only the planet Venus, but the goddess mysteries it represents, belonging to Ishtar, Inanna, Astarte, Aphrodite, Mary, and many others. While this is very controversial for some people, I simply bring it up to demonstrate the symbolic association the sun has with the spiritual light, which can die and be reborn. So whether you call this ancient seafaring civilization Phoenician, or Canaanite, or Aryans during the age of Aries, and no, Aryan does not mean nobility. Yes, they were considered nobility by non-Aryans, but that's not the meaning of the word. Keep in mind that Aryans existed 5,000 years ago, and the demographics you see today, despite their nationalistic pride, are a far cry from the original Aryans, which are much closer to the Yazidis in both culture and ethnicity than the modern Islamified inhabitants of Iran or India, which has recently banned its caste system imposed by the Aryans millennia ago. In the Gnostic text of the Nag Hammadi library, we also read about the phoenix. Quote, Thus, when Sophia Zoe saw that the rulers of the darkness had laid a curse upon her counterparts, she was indignant, and coming out of the first heaven with full power, she chased those rulers out of their heavens and cast them into the sinful world, so that there they should dwell in the form of evil spirits upon the earth, so that in their world it might pass the 1,000 years in paradise, a soul-endowed living creature called Phoenix. It kills itself and brings itself back to life as a witness to the judgment against them. For they did wrong to Adam and his race, unto the consummation of the age. There are 3 phoenixes in paradise. The first is immortal, the second lives 1,000 years. As for the third, it is written in the sacred book that it is consumed. So too, there are 3 baptisms. The first is spiritual, the second is by fire, the third is by water. The 2 bulls in Egypt possess a mystery, the sun and the moon. Sophia received the universe. From the day that she made the sun and moon, she put a seal upon her heaven, unto eternity. It is written concerning it, the just man will blossom like a phoenix, and the phoenix first appears in a living state and dies, and rises again, being a sign of what has become apparent at the consummation of the age. Of course, this is highly symbolic and to a large degree misunderstood in many Western esoteric practices, where there's an apparent knowledge gap regarding the role of esoteric practices and their effect on the subtle and not so subtle bodies of the practitioner. In the East, all practices, whether designated as such or not, are designed to awaken the semi-dormant energy that resides in all of creation, and particularly in living beings. This energy is known as the serpent fire and the dragon, and is at the heart of serpent symbology and mystery schools, which symbolically deal with light, sometimes labeled as Luciferian. The basis of Kabbalah is that through increasing levels of density, humanity has come into its present state of physical incarnation, consciousness, and psychic awareness. Through internal alchemy, transmutation exercises, and tantric meditations, the energy latent in the practitioner can be awakened, purified, harnessed, and directed. This energy can then be used for spiritual vitality, psychic expansion, physical health, and other benefits. The secret fire is directly linked to the alchemical transmutation of sex energy, and since I've covered this topic several times recently, in this presentation I'll instead include a segment from the late Bill Cooper, who in 1994 broadcasted an episode on the element of fire, solar energies, and the astral flame. As we listen, I hope you'll enjoy a stroll through Cologne, Germany.
Since the earliest times, man has venerated the element of fire above all others. Even the most untutored savage seems to recognize in the flame something closely resembling the volatile fire that he believes dwells within his soul. The mysterious, vibrant, radiant energy of fire was beyond his ability to analyze, yet he felt its power. It could be debated that as man sat huddled in the cold, in the darkness of the night, watching as lightning struck a tree, and the tree burst into flames, that man in his primitive form believed that he saw the presence of God. Indeed, it may have been this fire in lightning form that began the tale of the angel of light, flung to the earth after rebelling against God, and man picking up a burning branch, keeping it alive, the living fire. When it began to grow smaller and the light grow dim, he would quickly rush He'd get another branch and light it afire and watch it until maybe he fell asleep and it went out. And the next time he found a tree burning from a lightning strike, maybe there were 2 or 3 in the party, and maybe they took turns and kept it going. And maybe it was this fire that caused man to ignite the first spark of intelligence, and for the first time have original thought. For the philosophers of fire were certainly the first leaders, the first priests. They hoarded the secret from the others, and that has been their pattern on to this day. The vibrant, mysterious, radiant energy of fire was beyond his ability to comprehend. Yet he felt its power. And knowing that the sun was the only thing in the heavens that brought warmth, it was then a very short distance to the connection that the fire came from the sun, and the sun was the symbol of the mighty force of God. And of course, many believed that the sun was indeed God. The fact that during thunderstorms, fire descended in mighty bolts from heaven, felling trees and otherwise dealing destruction, caused the primordial human being to recognize in its fury the anger of God. Later, when man personified the elements and created the multitudinous pantheons which now exist and have existed throughout history, he placed in the hand of his supreme deity the torch, the thunderbolt, or the flaming sword, and upon his head a crown, its gilded points symbolizing the flaming rays of the sun, and all crowns on all of the heads of kings and emperors and mighty sultans have been the symbols of the rays of the sun. The mighty Zeus, who dwelt upon Mount Olympus and was the patriarch of the gods, held in his hand a bolt of lightning. Mystics have traced sun worship back to early Lemuria and fire worship to the origin of the human race. In fact, the element of fire controls to a certain degree both the plant and the animal kingdoms, and is the only element which can subjugate the metals. And, indeed, without the sun there would be no life on this planet. Either consciously or instinctively, every living thing honors the orb of day. The sunflower always faces the solar disk. The Atlanteans were sun worshippers, they say in the legends of Atlantis, while the American Indians, or remnants at least of the earlier Atlantean people, they say in the mysteries, still regard the sun as the proxy of the supreme light giver. And many early peoples believed that the sun was a reflector rather than the source of light, reflecting the power and the beauty and the energy of God himself. And it is evidenced by the fact that they often pictured the sun god as carrying on his arm a highly polished shield on which was chased the solar face. Now this shield, ladies and gentlemen, catching the light of the infinite one, reflected it to all parts of the universe. During the year, the sun passes through the 12 houses of the heavens, where, like Hercules, it performs 12 labors. The annual death and resurrection of the sun has been a favorite theme among unnumbered religions. The names of nearly all the great gods and saviors have always been associated with either the element of fire, the solar light, or its correlate, the mystic and spiritual light invisible. what you may now call the ether. Jupiter, Apollo, Hermes, Mithras, Bacchus, Dionysius, Odin, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Zarathustra, Fohai, Eo, Vishnu, Shiva, Agni, Balder, Hiram Abiff, Moses, Samson, Jason, Vulcan, Uranus, Allah, Osiris, Ra, Bel, Baal, Nebo, Serapis, and King Solomon, Sol, On, are some of the numerous deities and supermen whose symbolic attributes are derived from the manifestations of the solar power, and whose names, ladies and gentlemen, indicate their relationship to light and fire. For Solomon, Sol-Am-On, is the name of the sun in 3 different languages. Most of you were not aware of that. According to the Greek mysteries, the gods gazing down from Mount Olympus repented that they had made man, and I bet you they still do, and never having given to the primitive creature an immortal spirit, they decided that no harm would be done if the quarreling, dissenting human ingrates, the whimpering sheeple of the world, were destroyed forever, and the place where they had been left vacant for a nobler race. And I bet there are many who believe that today. Really, look around you. Why should anybody come to save us? Are you sick? Or maybe you just can't see and can't hear. Discovering the plans of the gods, Prometheus, in whose heart was a great love for struggling humanity, determined to bring to mankind the divine fire which would make the human race immortal, so that not even the gods could destroy it. So Prometheus flew to the home of the sun god, and, lighting a tiny reed with the solar fire, he carried it to the children of the earth, warning them that the fire should always be used for the glorification of the gods and the unselfish service of each other. Prometheus, you see, was a tremendous lightning strike. And the myth, the story of Prometheus, is the metaphor of the ancients used to explain what happened because they didn't know anything about lightning or electricity, or, for that matter, much about fire itself. They burned the homes of their enemies. You see, men were thoughtless and unkind. They took the divine fire brought them by Prometheus and used it to destroy one another. They burned the homes of their enemies. Most recently, in Sweden or Switzerland. Before that, in Waco, Texas. I could go on and on and on. And with the aid of heat, they tempered steel, making swords and armor, and used these instruments to kill each other. They grew more selfish and more arrogant, defying the gods, but they could not be destroyed, for they then possessed the sacred fire. So the story goes. For his disobedience, Prometheus, like Lucifer, remember, these are all metaphors for things that man could not understand. For his disobedience, Prometheus, like Lucifer, was chained and placed upon the brow of Mount Caucasus, or as some pronounce it, Caucasus, there to remain with a vulture gnawing at his liver until a human being should master the sacred fire and become perfect. This prophecy was fulfilled by Hercules, who climbed Mount Caucasus, broke the fetters of Prometheus, and liberated the friend of man who had been in torture for so many ages. And remember, Prometheus really represents Lucifer. Hercules represents the initiate who, as his name implies, partakes of the glory of light. Prometheus is the vehicle of solar energy. The divine fire which he brought to men is a mystic essence in their own natures, which they must redeem and regenerate if they would liberate their own crucified souls from the rock of their base physical natures. Remember what I told you? You see, according to occult philosophy, the sun in reality is a threefold orb, two parts of its nature being invisible. The globe, which we see, is merely the lowest phase of the solar nature and is the body of the demiurgus, or, as the Jews call him, Jehovah, and the Brahmins, Shiva, the sun being symbolized by an equilateral triangle. The three powers of the solar disk are said to be co-equal. The three phases of the sun are called will, wisdom, and action. Will is related to the principle of life, wisdom to the principle of light, and action or friction to the principle of heat. You see, by will, they believe the heavens were created and the eternal life continued in supreme existence. In other words, the creation of the universe came from an original, spontaneous thought, and by desire was swept into action, and by action, friction, and striving the earth was formed, and the physical universe molded by the lords of the fire. The fire mist passed gradually from the molten condition into its present, more orderly state. Thus heaven and nature were formed. But between these two was a great void, for God did not comprehend nature, and nature did not comprehend the deity. The lack of intercourse between these two spheres of consciousness was similar to the condition of paralysis, in which the consciousness realizes the condition of its body, but you see, owing to the lack of nerve connection, is incapable of governing or directing the activities of the body. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, they believe that between life and action there came a mediator, which was called light or intelligence, Prometheus, Lucifer, and matters not what you call it. Light partakes of both life and action. They believe it is the sphere of blending. An intelligence stood between heaven and earth, for through its medium man learned of the existence of his God, and God began his ministrations to the needs of men. And while both life and action were simple substances, light was a compound, for they believed the invisible part of light was of the nature of heaven, and the visible part of the nature of earth. So down through the ages, this light is said to have taken upon itself bodies. And although these bodies have borne witness to that light, the great spiritual truth of the mysteries behind the symbol of the embodied light is that in the soul, they believe, of every creature within whose mind intelligence is born, there dwells a spirit which assumes the nature of this intelligence. And they believe that every truly intelligent man and woman who is working to spread light in the world is Christened or lightened by the actual labor which he or she is seeking to perform. The fact that light, which represents intelligence, partakes of the natures of both God and the earth, is proved, they believe, by the names given to the personifications of this light. For at one time, they were called the sons of men, and at another time, the sons of God. The initiate in the mysteries was always instructed concerning the existence of three sons, the first of which, the vehicle for God the Father, enlightened and warmed his spirit. The second, the vehicle of God the Son, enfolded and broadened his mind. The third, the vehicle of God the Holy Spirit, nourished and strengthened his body. Light is not only a physical element to these people, it is also a mental and spiritual element. And in the temple, the disciple is told to revere the invisible Son even more than the visible one, for every visible thing is only an effect of the invisible or causal, the generative force represented by an obelisk. And as God is the cause of all causes, he dwells in the invisible world of causation and always in the Trinity, and is represented by the symbol in the Greek alphabet, delta. Delta. As in Lieutenant Colonel James Bobo Gritz of Delta Force. Quote, the ancient Romans are said to have preserved lights in their sepulchres many ages by the oiliness of gold. And here steps in the art of the Rosicrucians, alchemy. And remember what I told you, these are all metaphors for something much deeper that mean quite a different story than what you may perceive. This oiliness of gold, resolved by hermetic methods into a liquid substance, and it is reported that at the dissolution of the monasteries in the time of Henry VIII, there was found a lamp which had then burned in a tomb about 300 years after Christ, nearly 1,200 years. And two of these subterranean lamps are to be seen in the Museum of Rarities at Leiden in Holland, Netherlands. And one of these lamps in the papacy of Paul III was found in the tomb of Tullia, so named, Cicero's daughter, which had been shut up 1,550 years. Now, Madame Blavatsky, in her tome entitled Isis Unveiled, gives a number of formulae for the making of ever-burning lamps, and states in a footnote that she herself saw one made by a disciple of the Hermetic arts, which she claims had burned steadily without fuel for 6 years previous to the publication of her book. It's sad, however, that upon publication of her book, those who asked to see the lamp were told that the fire had gone out. So the ever-burning lamp was, of course, a most appropriate symbol, ladies and gentlemen, of the eternal fire in the universe. Remember, all of these stories are metaphors. And while chemistry has denied the possibility of manufacturing one, the fact that many have been made and seen over a period of thousands of years is a warning against dogmatizing. Against dogmatizing. Get the message? The Druid priests in Britain, recognizing the sun as the proxy of the supreme deity, used a ray of solar light to start their altar fires. They did this by concentrating the ray upon a specially cut crystal or aquamarine set in the form of a brooch or buckle upon the front of the belt of the arch-druid, and this brooch was called the Liath Mysakith, and I believe that I pronounced that sort of right. It's spelled Liath, the second word, Meisicith. And this was supposed to possess the power of drawing the divine fire of the gods down from heaven and concentrating its energies for the service of men. And in certain of the ancient temples, ladies and gentlemen, specially arranged lenses were placed in the ceiling at various angles so that each year at the vernal equinox, the sun at high noon would send its rays through these glasses and light the altar fires which had been specially prepared for this occasion. The priests considered this process equivalent to the gods having actually lighted the fires for themselves. And the Son was said to be doing the Father's work at the Most High. In other legends, the Most High God, represented by the sun in its highest position in the sky, in honor of Hu, spelled H-U, the supreme deity of the Druids, the people of Britain and Gaul celebrated an annual lighting of fires on what they termed Midsummer's Day. One of the reasons why mistletoe was sacred to the Druids was because many of the priests believed that this peculiar parasitic plant fell to the earth in the form of lightning bolts. Sound familiar? And that wherever a tree was struck by lightning, the seed of the mistletoe was placed within its bark. In the great length of time the mistletoe remained alive after being cut from the tree had much to do with the veneration showered upon it by the Druids. That this plant was also a powerful medium for the collection of the mysterious cosmic fire circulated through the ethers was discovered by the early priests who believed this and who valued the mistletoe because of its close connection with the mysterious astral light, which is in reality the astral body of the earth. And concerning this, Eliphas Levi writes in his History of Magic, and I quote, "The Druids were priests and physicians, curing by magnetism and charging amulets with their fluidic influence. Their universal remedies were mistletoe and serpent's eggs, because these substances attract the astral light in a special manner." The solemnity with which mistletoe was cut down, they believed, drew upon this plant the popular confidence and rendered it powerfully magnetic. Magnetic. The progress of magnetism, they believed, would someday reveal the absorbing properties of mistletoe. So they understood and believe that they still understand the secret of those spongy growths which draw the unused virtues of plants and become surcharged with tinctures and saviors. Mushrooms, truffles, gall on trees, and the different kinds of mistletoe are employed in the mysteries with understanding by a medical science which will be new because it is old. Certain plants, minerals, and animals have been held sacred among all nations of the earth because of their peculiar sensitiveness to the claimed astral fire. The cat, sacred to the city of Bubastis in Egypt, is an example of a peculiarly magnetized animal. You see, anyone stroking the fur of a domestic cat in a dark room can see the electrical emanations in the form of green phosphorescent light, and this must have surely titillated the ancient priests. And in the temples of Bast, sacred to the cat goddess, 3 colored cats were viewed with unusual veneration, as was any member of the feline family whose 2 eyes were of different colors. Lodestone and radium in the mineral kingdom and various parasitic growths in the plant kingdom are strangely susceptible to the cosmic fire, which today we know as phosphorescence. The magicians of the Middle Ages surrounded themselves with certain animals, such as bats, cats, snakes, and monkeys, because they were able to borrow the power of the astral light from these creatures and appropriate it to their own uses. For this same reason, the Egyptians and certain of the Greeks kept cats in the temples, and serpents were always in evidence at the oracle of Delphi. The auric body of a snake, they say, is one of the most remarkable sights that the clairvoyant will ever see, and the secrets concealed within its aura demonstrate why the serpent is the symbol of wisdom among so many nations. And of course, in the mysteries, as the snake sheds its skin, it is the symbol of death and rebirth or resurrection. That Christianity has preserved in part, at least, the primitive fire worship of antiquity is evident in many of its symbols and rituals. The incense burner, so often used in Christian churches, is a pagan symbol relating to the regeneration of the human soul and was in use long before Christianity even came along. The incense within the burner, made from the extracted essences of various plants, represents the life forces within the body of man. The flaming spark burning in the midst of the incense is emblematic of the spiritual germ concealed in the midst of the material organism of man. You see, the spiritual spark in the mysteries is an infinitesimal part of what they call the divine flame, or the great fire of the universe, from whose flaming heart the altar fires of all his creatures have been lighted. The spark of life gradually consumes the incense, so the spiritual nature of man, through the processes of regeneration, gradually consumes all the gross elements of the body, transmuting them into soul power, symbolized by the smoke, and as a person ages, he therefore grows wiser. That was their explanation for the wisdom of the old and the deterioration of the body. For as the person ages, the gross elements are burned by the life flame, which transmutes them into soul flower. Therefore, the body diminishes and the wisdom is increased. Simple, huh? So what's all this research into geriatrics? Although smoke is actually a dense and physical substance, yet light enough to rise in clouds, they believed the soul was actually a physical element. They believed that through purification and the fire of aspiration, it has taken upon itself the nature of intangible atmosphere. Though composed of the substance of earth, it becomes light enough to rise as a fragrant odor into the presence of deity. While some authorities have held that the form of the cross was derived from an ancient Egyptian instrument called the Nilometer, used for measuring the inundations of the Nile, others hold the opinion that the symbol had its origin in the two crossed sticks used by primitive peoples to generate fire by friction. In the History of Freemasonry, written by Mackey, 33rd degree Freemason, and this particular edition printed in 1898, there is only one cross listed in the entire 7 volumes. And it is the swastika. The use of the bell towers and campaniles in the construction of the cathedrals of medieval Christianity, also the more familiar conventionalized church steeple, may be traced back to the fire obelisks of Egypt, which were placed in front of the temples to the superior deities representing the generative force or the rays of the sun, the male principle. All pyramids are symbols of fire. The maypole had its origin in similar antiquity, where it is both a phallic symbol and an emblem of the cosmic fire, the generative force, and the dancing of the maidens around the maypole was, ladies and gentlemen, supposed to bring increased fertility to the land. For the maypole, again, in case you've forgotten the last few sentences, represented nothing less than the phallus. The prevailing custom of having churches face the east is, of course, further evidence of the survival of sun worship. And in the Masonic Lodge, the master sits in the east of the lodge, Practically the only branch of the human race that does not observe this rule is the Arabic. The Mohammedans face their mosques toward Mecca, but still have their appointed hours of prayer governed by the sun. The rose windows and ivy-colored walls are survivals of pagandom, for ivy was sacred to Bacchus because of the shape of its leaf, and this plant was always allowed to trail over the walls of the temple sacred to the Greek solar deity. And all over Europe you'll see the cathedrals covered with ivy. The golden ornaments upon the altars of Christian churches should remind the philosophical observer that gold is the sacred metal of the sun, because according to alchemists, the sun ray itself crystallized in the earth, thus forming this precious metal, which incidentally, folks, is still being made. And if you visit a Jewish synagogue, the most elaborate synagogues will usually contain a huge golden symbol of the sun. The candles, so often seen adorning the altars and most frequently appearing in an uneven number, are a reminder that the uneven numbers are sacred to the sun. When 3 candles are used, for instance, they symbolize the 3 aspects of the sun, sunrise, noon, and sunset, and are thus emblematic of the Trinity. When 7 are used, they represent the planetary angels called by the Jews Elohim, whose numerical and Kabbalistic values are also 7. And when the even numbers 12 or 24 appear, they represent the signs of the zodiac and the spirits of the hour of the day, called by the ancient Persians the Izids. And when only one light is shown, it is the emblem of the Supreme Invisible Father, who is one, and the little red lamp ever burning over an altar is an offering to the Demiurgus Jehovah, the Lord builder of forms. So, what oil is to the flame, ladies and gentlemen, blood is to the spirit of man. Therefore, oil is often used in anointing, for it is a fluid sacred to the solar power. Because oil contains the life of the sun, it is used in large quantities in far northern lands where it is necessary to generate an abundance of body heat. Hence the proclivity of the Eskimos for eating tallow candles and whale oil. You see, it has stored energy from the sun. Now they say that the actual word Christ is itself sufficient proof that fire and the worship of fire are the 2 most essential elements of the Christian faith. For the rays of light pouring from the sun were viewed by the ancients, and check this if you don't believe it, for it's true, were viewed by the ancients as the blood of the celestial Lamb, which at the vernal equinox died for the sin of the world and redeemed all humanity through its blood or rays. And then the world sank into winter. The mystery schools of ancient Egypt taught that the blood was the vehicle of the consciousness. The spirit of man travels through the bloodstream and therefore was not actually located in any one part of the compound organism. You see, they did not know. They believed it moved through the body with the rapidity of thought, so that consciousness of self, cognition of externals, and the sense of perception could be localized in any part of the body by the exercise of the willpower. The initiates viewed the blood as a mysterious liquid, somewhat gaseous in nature, which served as a medium for manifesting the fire of man's spiritual nature. This fire, coursing through the system, animated and vitalized all parts of the form, thus keeping the spiritual nature in touch with all of its physical extremities. And at one point in history, since life was formed in the womb, and they believed that it was formed from a clot of blood, and the baby was endowed with intelligence. At one point in history, it was fashionable for those who could afford it to drink the menstrual blood of virgins, believing that this would make them wise. Samael, incidentally, was the fiery father of Cain. through whom a part of humanity has received the flame of aspiration and is thus separate from the sons of Seth, whom they say was fathered by Jehovah. And if you'll read your Bible in Genesis, you will find that before Eve was ever created, God made man and woman. There were men and women on this earth according to Genesis, according to those of you who say that the Bible is infallible, and if you believe that, you must believe, because it says it, that God created man in His image. Man and woman created He them, and He did this before. The people that you've been taught came first. Yet, you know, you have a tendency to read the Bible and make it fit whatever you want to believe rather than believe what it says. And what I'm telling you is in that dim chapter of history, nobody knows, nobody knew, and nobody's ever going to know. And there are battles raging on this earth today because there are people who believe that Cain was sired through a tryst with Eve by Satan, and that Abel, sired by Adam and Eve, killed by Cain, and then another son, Seth, who made war against the sons of Cain. They're still fighting this battle today. Today, folks.
My name is Robert Sepehr. I'm an anthropologist. My published work is available on Amazon, as well as through various other major book outlets. They make a great gift. If you'd like to support my work, you can do that through patreon.com. There should be a link in the description section for those who are interested. I appreciate it. Thank you. Please hit the like button and subscribe for future updates. As always, I look forward to reading your comments, so please leave me your thoughts below. Please have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.